Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have another edition of All My Books. All My Books has been a very fun video series where I talk about all my books by either a specific author or as part of a specific genre or subgenre or what have you. And so for authors, I've gone through a lot of fantasy authors and science fiction authors, but people who do both. I've done some media tie-in authors, and now I'm going to do a media tie-in author, but it's all from one specific franchise. I'm doing David Mack. David Mack, or also known as David Allen Mack for his writing, for his TV writing credits, is known for writing Star Trek novels. He's written, I want to say, upwards of either 25 or 30 Star Trek novels. I own 18 of his Star Trek novels, and I've read a little over half of them. And I'm super excited to get into the rest of them. And so I have them here to discuss. I have them in order of release date in my shelves, except for his books that were part of the Vanguard series. I did those kind of at a different time, but other than that, these are all based off of when they. These are all based off of when they released. So why don't I begin with my books of his that are Star Trek, A Time to Kill and A Time to Heal. These are the two books from the A Time To series. I did a Time To retrospective on the channel, and the A Time To series itself was okay or not great for most of its run. And then all of a sudden, when David Mack took over, it's like the series kicked up a gear. It's like the series just, became really awesome. And I really enjoyed both of these books. I thought they both just gave the series great action, great storytelling, great political intrigue, great stuff, and really led us into Nemesis well. These are books, this series takes place in between Star Trek Insurrection and Star Trek Nemesis, and just really does a good job of bridging the gap. And these two books in particular lead into the final book, A Time for War and A Time for Peace, and then the follow-up, Articles of the Federation, which were just all fantastic novels across the board. So the books were okay or not great beforehand, and then all of a sudden they just kick into high gear with his books. So I really enjoyed them. And I believe A Time to Kill reached the USA Today bestseller list. And these were his first novels that he wrote, and he wrote them back to back. Next, I have his DS9 book Warpath, which is actually on my to-read list. I haven't read it yet, but I have it on my to-read list. One of his few just standalone books for DS9, but I'm interested to read it. Next, I have what is probably his best series, and as a trilogy, it is solid. It is still up there in my estimation, and that is the Destiny trilogy. You have the book Gods of Night, Mere Mortals, and Lost Souls. When I read this trilogy initially, I was a tad bit disappointed because it's promised as the Borg trilogy, and it's the alpha and the omega of the Borg, and you do get the beginning and the end of the Borg in this book series, but it's not what I expected it to be. I thought it'd be more action packed, and there are other Borg novels that lead up to this that are certainly action packed, but this trilogy does a good job of balancing all the various Star Trek series. You have DS9 as part of this. You have the Aventine, you have the TNG crew, you have the Titan crew, you have all the crews, you have characters from the Enterprise series. The NX-02 Columbia is present in this trilogy. And just the way it's handled is really good. You have the whole Kaliar situation. And so as a series, probably his best series. These books, as I think about them, my estimation of them goes up over time. They're just really impressive. And at the time, this is one of the best-selling Star Trek series. It's just so well regarded among the fandom. And people say, what's the Star Trek books you have to read before you die? Well, I think Destiny is on pretty much everyone's list. Next, I have a book of his, Zero Sum Game, the first book in the Typhon Pact series. Really a middling series as a whole, and this book was fine. It wasn't great. It could have been so much better. It was just okay. Next, I have his trilogy, the Cold Equations trilogy. I read the first book, The Persistence of Memory, um, uh, early last year, early 2022, and just never got around to reading books 2 and 3. I don't know whether it was my schedule or what, but book 2 is Silent Weapons, book 3 is The Body Electric. And if you put these 3 books together, um, uh, here it is. If you put these 3 books together, they form a triptych, which I just find really fascinating. This first book I read, I thought it was really good, but not necessarily David Mack's best work. So I intend to read books 2 and 3 eventually, just haven't gotten to them yet. Next, I have what I think is his best novel. Like, as a single novel, this is his best work, by far. And that is A Ceremony of Losses from the Fall series. This is part of the 5-book The Fall event series that, while in some ways didn't work out as well as it could have, is still one of the best examples of how to write Star Trek fiction, because they basically take different characters from different ships and different shows for Star Trek and allow them all to be dealing with the political subplot, but they each have a piece of it, and you're slowly moving the piece forward until the end when it all resolves. And this book is just is some of the most dense thematic questions that any Star Trek book has. It is very accusatory, the way it deals with how the government should handle things, how science should handle things, how scientists should handle things. It's just a brilliant, brilliant book, and is really good. That series, The Fall, is so good and leads up to one of my favorite series in the Prey series. Next, you have they did the Legacies trilogy, and he did book 2 in the Legacies trilogy. That was really super entertaining. I still think the best book in the Legacies trilogy is the first book, Captain to Captain, by Greg Cox, but this book is also very well done. And it was the big 50th anniversary trilogy that they did for the original series, because it came out in 2016, 50 years after 1966's the original series came out. Next, I have his 4 Star Trek Vanguard novels. I've read 2 of these. One of the book is on my list to read as I'm recording this. Like, I'm going to be reading it in the next day or 2. And then the next book is the final one. So he wrote 4 of the books. There's a total of 8 Vanguard books. You have 4 of the novels are written by David Mack. 3 of the novels are written by either Dayton Ward and or Kevin Dillmore. And then there is one that is a short story collection, a novella collection by all of them, plus the editor, Marco Palmieri. And the first book is Harbinger, which I thought was an okay book, but was really frustrating overall. And then I have book 2... not book 2, book 3 in the series is Reap the Whirlwind, which was also an interesting book, but frustrating overall. So then I have the book that I'm going to be reading very soon is Precipice. And you know what? Every single Harbinger novel has been frustrating on some level, so I don't have too high hopes for this book, but it's pretty short, so I should, breeze through it. And then you have the final book, Storming Heaven, which has been promised as the big epic conclusion to this series, so I'm very interested to see how this all pans out. So that's Storming Heaven. Then I've gotten through his mass market paperbacks that he wrote. I'm now getting into his trade paperbacks. Right around 2017, the editors for the Star Trek line decided to move from pocketbooks, which did mass market, to gallery books so that they could do trade paperbacks. And probably, David Mack's known for starting new series, doing big things in the Star Trek universe. And Star Trek had trade paperbacks and hardcovers in the past, but they'd never been established as this was the way to do something. Well, David Mack established the trade paperback series for gallery with Desperate Hours, the first Discovery novel. I have not read this, but I intend to. I've read 2 Discovery books thus far, and I really enjoyed both of them. So I intend to read this one eventually, although it's not that well regarded from some things I read online. But this was the first Discovery novel, and it was the first trade paperback, and it launched the trade paperback line for gallery books, and I just can't wait to read this because I'm just really fascinated behind it. I understand why they moved to trade paperbacks, I really do, but I think it was a bad decision in the long run because they've produced so few books, ever since they moved to trade paperbacks. The next book on the list is the Star Trek Coda novel, Oblivion's Gate. The Coda trilogy really was the end of the post-Nemesis Star Trek line. The Coda trilogy wrapped up all these plot lines that we'd had all the way back to the A Time 2 series and the Avatar series. It wrapped up the characters, the plot lines, everything. And David Mack was like the showrunner for the series, but he worked with James Swallow and with Dayton Ward on the whole trilogy. But this book was the David Mack book, and this is the longest book in the series, probably one of the longest Star Trek novels. It can't be the longest Star Trek novel, but it's one of the longest, and it packs in so much story, so much things happen in this book, and it's just explosive and big and controversial. The ending of this book is controversial. I'll leave it at that. So, but it had to happen. Then his final novel that I have is his novel Harm's Way from the original series, which also should be known that this is part of the Vanguard universe. Although you don't necessarily need to read the Vanguard novels, but if you do, you will totally appreciate this book more. This book references Vanguard and also kind of has some of the Vanguard ships involved, but it's not like a Vanguard novel like specifically entrenched in that universe. And it's really entertaining. One of his better books of late. Just a good kind of, even though I mentioned it's part of that, it is kind of standalone. And one of the few TOS books that we've gotten recently. So I really appreciated this book. A really good exploration of Spock, and also just tells like a classic Trek exploring a new planet, a new territory type thing. So this book was really good. So that is my collection of 18 novels by David Mack, all of them for Star Trek. You know, he writes interesting stories. I don't love every single novel he's written, but when he writes great novels, he writes great novels. So, if you've read David Mack, what are your favorite books of his, and why is it Destiny? What are your favorite books by him? And do you collect him? And who are your other favorite Star Trek authors that you've collected? Let me know all those thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.